Welcome everybody to the 2025 Cybersecurity Summit Take Command. Fantastic session today, one I'm super excited for. I'm joined by Tom and James from the Tempest 2. And well, frankly, I think your story needs to get in front of our listeners and viewers. A lot of people probably don't know where you're from, what's gone on. So I think let's just kick things off. Tell us about the Tempest 2 and where you've kind of developed in the last 10 years.
Yeah, amazing. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having us. Amazing to be here. We are the Tempest 2, and we have the wild job title of being professional adventurers, and we understand how ridiculous that sounds. But to go back to the start of the Tempest 2, so James and I met working for Red Bull many, many years ago, went our separate ways, and then in 2014, this huge life-changing moment was basically over some drunken text messages. I was at a pub in East London in St Catherine's Dock watching an incredible event called the Clipper World Yacht Race. And my mum had basically entered this massive race. She had raced a sailing boat from London all the way to Brazil. And I was stood at the bar watching my mum celebrate with this amazing crew and had this realization that, you know, now my mum was officially more of a badass than I was. So I text James, he was at a birthday party. We both had a bit to drink. And in our drunken state, you know, we signed up to rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, some text messages went back and forth. And we then made the big decision to tell everyone around us, everyone that would listen, that we were now legendary adventurers. So we woke up the next day and now had this obligation to go and do it. And fast forward 18 months, it's worth mentioning that neither James or I had ever rowed. We had never sailed. We had never been to sea. We'd never done anything more than a 10K. And we had to go and make this huge 3,000-mile adventure, planning on going from the Canary Islands all the way to the Caribbean, a reality. And what that looked like was 18 months of training, raising about £100,000 in sponsorship from brands, understanding how to obviously row, how to navigate at sea. And fast forward 18 months, we'd managed to do that. James and I boarded this 6-meter rowing boat in a tiny little port called Porto Magan on the Canary Islands. And we started to row. It took us about half an hour to get out of this tiny port. We ping-ponged between every expensive yacht, got in the way of a ferry. And as we were leaving, this is like a really poignant moment of this adventure. If you can imagine, we had been talking about this moment for 18 months, imagining it. Our family were there, friends were there. And as we came out of this harbour, this big Northern English guy came up to us on a pedalo. And he was like, "Where are you boys going?" And we're full of energy, full of enthusiasm, full of adrenaline. And we're like, "Mate, we are rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. We are going to the Caribbean." And he just looked at us and just said, "No chance." And then dusted us. And that was the last person in a long list of people that told us we couldn't do it, we shouldn't do it, we weren't capable of doing it. And we'll come back to that a bit later. But that was the start of our first adventure. And we were then, you know, on the way to 3,000 miles across the Atlantic.
Yeah, and we had no idea what was in store for us, and it ended up being 54 days of calamity, of constant uncertainty and change and challenge. We were asked before the row, more than any other question, what happens if you capsize? A very negative question, we thought, and it was one that we kind of ignored. But unfortunately, we got the answer to that question on day 10 or night 10, in what was, you know, obviously one of the most intense, insane experiences of our lives. Fast forward a week after that, and we ended up going through the first hurricane to form in the Atlantic in the last 65 years. Not to mention that we came into contact with sharks. We came very close to getting run over by a shipping tanker. And then eventually, after 54 days and losing over a stone each and pushing ourselves beyond anything that we'd ever imagined, we saw Barbados as this glow over our shoulder. And it was just so surreal. Not just 2 months at sea that was incredibly challenging, but 18 months of raising the money, you know, learning how to row, getting ourselves prepared, and all the while, people telling us that we've got no business doing this, we should not be there. So to eventually see Barbados and spend the next 6 hours slogging our way down the west side of the island, we finally turned into Port St Charles with our family and friends waiting, and yeah, the moment was sweet, and it was a culmination of all that hard work.
And just to kind of give some reality to that amazing moment, we actually ended up rowing 3,000 miles, 54 days, and we actually got stuck on an anchor chain of another boat about 6 meters from the finish line.
I was going to leave that out, that part.
Yeah, which isn't in the nice shiny edit, but it's the reality of it. And what was so fascinating when we landed in Barbados, as James said, we had the physical changes, the beards, the tans, the weight loss. But when we touched land, we had essentially realised what we were capable of. And as I mentioned earlier, we were told by an endless list of people that we couldn't do it, we shouldn't do it, it was above our pay grade, we weren't qualified. And in taking that risk and going through everything we went through, 2 months at sea, we'd essentially realised, our true potential. And we put that down to something we're really firm believers in, that when we touched land in Barbados, we essentially removed the word can't from our vocabulary. And what that led to was we flew back to London, we went back to our jobs in London, and within 6 months had handed our notice in. And to take the Tempest 2 full time. And we had no idea what the Tempest 2 was, how we were going to make money, but we were planning on, maybe we do more adventures. And really what the Tempest 2 has become is, I guess, a way of us trying to inspire ordinary people like James and I to achieve extraordinary things. And we do that by taking on big challenges all over the world that we have no experience in. So we did the row, we then went and climbed Mont Blanc 6 months later. We then learnt to ride motorbikes within a week and then rode to the Sahara. We traversed Patagonia trying to set records in this big ultra triathlon, and everything we did was from this novice perspective. And we're such believers that people put this ceiling on themselves, whether that's professionally or personally, that, I can't do that because I've never done it. I can't do that, I'm not strong enough, I haven't got the time. And really the whole purpose of the Tempest 2 is to try and break down that barrier and get people to think, if these guys can do that, then why am I not giving myself the credit in doing this? And it's led us on incredible adventures, and our most recent one was probably the biggest, the riskiest, the one that had the biggest impact on us over in the US.
Yeah, and this massive adventure where we climbed El Capitan, a really famous rock formation in Yosemite National Park, that was actually born in the hurricane. So we were stuck inside the cabin for 3 days, and the desktop background was Yosemite. And I said as a joke, imagine climbing El Capitan. And then fast forward 4 years later, and we were stood at the base, having never climbed before, ready to climb El Cap. And it was the first big adventure where it wasn't just about grit and being uncomfortable. It required a huge amount of skill. And again, we gave ourselves 18 months of learning to get ready for this thing. And climbing is one of those things that the more you learn, the more you realise what you don't know. And it was like constantly opening doors and going down various rabbit holes. And eventually we got to the point where we felt, right, we're ready, let's go and do it. So we spent 3 days vertically, camping on the side of the rock face, dragging ourselves along with a 50-kilo bag up the side of El Capitan, in what was the most intense 3 days of our life, the most intense adventure experience we've ever had. Whether it was swinging, hundreds of feet laterally between crack systems, or having to find an emergency bivvy on a ledge the size of a pizza tray and sleeping there for a few hours, to finally, eventually getting onto the summit, just completely physically and mentally exhausted. It was a really nice personification of the growth of the Tempest 2 and this mindset that we'd been building over half a decade by that point. And it was pretty special.
And then I guess the other side of our business, which is why we're here today, is we work with amazing organisations like Rapid7, from the biggest tech companies in the world to small startups, to really try and develop the mindset of their teams, to unlock potential, to get them to buy into trust and accountability and view risk in a different way. I'm sure we'll go into a few of those things now, but that's really our story up to this point, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, sounds it. I'm sat here thinking, and I can't get over this, of never done any of this before. You climb into the boat, and then personally for me, I would be sat there in this headspace of, what the heck am I doing? Why am I here? The stress, the noise, the naysayers, the doubt, kind of everything you've surfaced there. What was going through your mind that first adventure? You're sat on the boat, you're staring out to sea, and the oars go in.
It was a surreal moment. Like I don't know if anyone watching has done a marathon or had a big event, even like giving a speech at a wedding. You're kind of visualizing that moment for the months leading up to it, and it was no different. You know, it was all we thought about when we went to sleep and when we woke up. And when we stepped foot on that boat, you know, I think people imagine that there was a big start line and fireworks and press, and it was the opposite. The world was just going on around us. We were just trying to navigate our way out the port. There was maybe 5 people there to wave us off. And it was really surreal. There was a big element of relief that we'd actually made it to the start line. The 18 months of fundraising and learning was a challenge in itself, but also full of nerves, full of anxiety. It's hard for us to put into words how naive we were when we pulled out of that harbour. We genuinely did not know what we were in for, what we were doing. We were still trying to figure out how to row as we left. So yeah, the emotion was there, but there was a big element of relief for that for sure. And you know, going into the row in the 54 days and what it really ended up being, I guess.
Yeah, and I think to go on to, you know, slightly bit further into the row after this capsize, so just to bring a bit of context to it, I was on the oars for the 4 a.m. till 6 a.m. shift, because the way we'd work is we'd row in 2-hour shifts. So I would row for 2 hours, at which point Tom would be asleep or eating and recharging, and we'd very rarely row together, and we'd just swap every 2 hours to keep the boat moving. So I had the 4 a.m. till 6 a.m. shift. And the waves were massive, the wind was massive, and in those night shifts, there's not a lot you can do really. You just stare at a little speedometer on the cabin that tells you how fast you're going, how much progress you're making towards your destination. And in that regard, it was going amazingly well. And then this big rogue wave reared up on our right-hand side, and we got completely barreled. So while I was stuck in the rowing position at one point, it felt like I'd been rugby tackled over the side of the boat. The lip of the wave as it broke smashed me over the side, and I was forced into what felt like a washing machine. You know, my head torch got whipped off my head, and it was all very surreal. And I you know, finally made my way back to the boat as it self-righted, and Tom kind of stuck his head out the cabin door. But what was really interesting in that moment is when people did ask us about what happens if you capsize, you know, how are you going to handle that? It filled us with dread and with fear, and we thought, well, you know, hopefully we don't have to handle that, but it's going to be headless chickens, it's going to be carnage. And what was really interesting was the opposite was true. I was personally on the edge of going down that route of losing control, but having Tom there to be able to bring a sense of calm and clarity to the situation made all the difference in the world. And it taught us that importance of being able to stay calm under pressure throughout the chaos. And you know, we didn't know what the next version of that was. There was absolutely no reason whatsoever that we might not capsize the next day or the next day. But going through that tough time together and being able to stay calm in those moments was really important and set us up for success going forward.
I mean, so much to unpick there, everything you've kind of been through. And I think the thing that hit me the most at the start of that is you weren't rowing together a lot of the time. That to me, immediately from your other adventures you kind of mentioned at the start, there must be a huge amount of mutual trust between you two, right? You can't see, you're recovering, sleeping, eating, whatever. You're powering the boat forward and then, you know, hit the hurricane, stick your head out. Are you all right, mate? Yeah. Bit bumpy, bit choppy. From all of your journeys, like, where do you feel you, I guess, had that peak moment of trust between you? And what were some of the steps on that journey?
Yeah, I think the most important thing in the success of our adventures is our relationship. And I think in the world of adventure, but also in the industry you guys are in any high pressure cooker situation, if you've got the wrong people in that environment, that's where friction happens. And I think for us, we're big believers that trust has to be earned through experiences. And obviously every single, you know, big moment, whether that's good or bad on these adventures or in our business, it builds trust. And I think, you know, when you look at it from a business perspective, in my opinion, if there was 2 identical teams and 2 identical companies, and Team A had, you know, a load of VC cash up front, they had nice, easy growth, nothing really went wrong, and they, you know, were ticking along well, and you compared that to the other team who maybe had to bootstrap for a while, maybe then had to, you know, pivot on a product, had to go through a rough period, but then got to the same point, I would put my money on the second team every time, because going through really challenging things on a regular basis as a collective, for us, is what builds really strong trust, really strong culture, and that resilience as a group. If everything's plain sailing, there's no adversity to be that glue. And in every adventure we've taken on, there's been moments we look back on where we've had to rely on the other person. And in Patagonia, we got lost, and I was in a really bad way. James had to drag me through. In the hurricane, we were both in the same situation, really struggling. The capsized, James was in the ocean. I had to get him on board. But the one that stands out for us, where it put our trust to the test more than ever, really, was halfway up El Capitan. To give you some context, we'd gone through day one. We were really struggling. We were sleeping on a ledge about 1,000 feet up. Woke up the next morning and had a game of rock, paper, scissors, which is how we decide if there's anything risky that needs to be done. Rock, paper, scissors is our solution. You guys should try it.
Hell of a leveler.
Yeah, and I'm actually awful at rock, paper, scissors. James is got my number mentally. But we played this game, and for the first time ever, I won. And James had to go and do something that required an enormous amount of trust.
Yeah, as soon as you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was this thing. It's a really famous pitch on the nose of El Capitan, which is the route that we climbed. And as Tom said, it's about 1,500 foot up the wall, and it's called the King Swing. And it's a 150 foot lateral swing from one crack system to another. And that's because the way you climb El Capitan is through a series of imperfections and cracks in the wall. And when one runs out, you have to get to another one. And sometimes that's just climbing sideways, but on this occasion, the gap's too big and the wall's blank. So Tom has to climb ahead, fix the rope that I'm on the other end of, and I have to sprint across the wall. It takes 10 minutes of trying back and forth until eventually reach this next crack system, kind of pull myself over, climb up to the next anchor and pull Tom across. And it's insane to kind of say the least, but it's the ultimate test of trust, because usually when things get daunting or scary or the pressure's on, the natural instinct is to try and control everything and bring everything close, and we personally try and do that as individuals and micromanage every little detail, which is what we'd been doing on day one and was probably why it was a bit slow climbing. And this was, we wouldn't have been able to carry on if that was the case with this. So I had to trust wholeheartedly that Tom had tied this knot correctly, and my life was in his hands.
It's tough to do.
It's a real test of trust, knowing his knot tying abilities. And that was one thing, to relinquish all control. But what was amazing was what happened after that fact, was the way that kind of freed us up, that embedded trust. Because we've trusted each other before, and the stakes have always felt a little bit different. And I think it's easy to trust your team around you, and you hear it a lot when the times are good and the going's great. But when you're really forced into those high pressure situations, those moments that don't occur very often, but when they do, everything gets put to the test. That is where trust is ultimately built, and that was the only reason we were able to continue that climb. And it's kind of stuck with us, until this very day. So it was nice to see how that trust in that one situation has translated into daily trust, in future adventures and as a business as well.
That sounds insane in terms of not just once putting trust in the marginally above average knot tying skills.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty.
I'm being generous.
Yeah, it's generous.
Being generous.
Yeah.
So, but you're running 15 times to get that swing.
Yeah.
To get that catch and get across.
He was screaming like a small child as well, it has to be said. He's coming across as a brave hero, but there was
were
some
moments.
panic there.
There were moments. I'm thinking here of that perspective on risk must have shifted. Like what you did prior to that adventure, prior to the row, your attitude and beliefs around risk and your kind of frame of mind around that. Like, how has that changed your day-to-day life now?
I think it's actually really interesting. So when we speak to people, people presume that we're these big risk takers, adrenaline junkies, and it's actually the polar opposite. We get scared, we're really fearful, we have huge anxiety around things. But what's so interesting, if I think back to that day that we spoke about leaving the harbour, about to row the Atlantic, I said we had this naivety, and really we knew what the risks were there or thereabouts, but we, in our naivety, really did very little to mitigate them. We had the approach of, if stuff goes wrong, we'll be reactive to it, which is fine in some circumstances. But I guess as we've grown and developed through all these adventures, and we've learned new things and about each other and ourselves, is our perception of risk now is very different. We definitely see it as a big motivator. LCAP's the great example, right? If you do the wrong knock, or if you fall or something happens, it's pretty black and white, the consequences of that. And that risk is a huge motivator to work harder in the prep, to control what you can control, to try and mitigate the things you can't control. And I think what we've learned, and in a business perspective, is trying to prepare for all those risks, understanding the risks, beats just having this firefighter mentality, every day of the week. And being open about what the risks are, what the consequences are, and how you can prepare for them ahead of time is something that has really changed over the years for us when we prepare for adventures. We plan to a point, but it's like, right, if this goes wrong, how are we going to deal with that? If this goes wrong, what's our plan B? And it just gives you confidence, really. Compared to when we left the harbour, we really were just at the mercy of whatever happened to us, and we got very lucky, to be perfectly honest, that the boat self-righted, that we got through the hurricane relatively unscathed, and a bit of luck came into that, and we basically just try and remove luck from the equation now and really focus on what we can do to kind of mitigate all of that.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting to see how our approach to risk has developed, and even recently I've got a small baby now, which again will change our approach to risk. But to go back to the El Capitan story, where I was talking about every day was like a school day and we were learning more and more. We were driven there by the risk and by bringing that risk to a level that we felt comfortable with. And we didn't feel like it was happening at a fast enough speed. We had a date in mind that we wanted to climb El Cap, and we were throwing ourselves into training, but we were based in the UK. We were spending time in climbing gyms. We were going to the Peak District, which is 20-metre high rocks, at the best of times, the biggest rocks in the Peak District. In El Capitan is 1,000 metres. It's a different ball game entirely. The rock type is different. The climbing style is different. And just to show how seriously we take mitigating these risks, we decided that we would move to Yosemite, and we'd live there in the valley in the back of a van for 4 weeks, and really take this seriously. And we would spend every morning going into the Starbucks in the valley with a coffee, watching videos, learning theoretically what to do, and then we'd spend the afternoon every single day going and applying that learning, all with the motivating factor of bringing that risk level down to a point where we felt comfortable. And then after 29 days, we were stood at the bottom of the rock, ready to go, in a position that we were definitely still daunted and was nerve-wracking, but we felt that we'd brought that risk down to a level that we were comfortable with, which was a complete shift and a complete evolution from pushing off the harbour in Gran Canaria with no idea, even what to do if we capsized, really, or we learnt the hard way there. And I must say it's much more reassuring doing it the way that we do it now.
And I think it's worth mentioning, actually, I don't know what you think about this, but you mitigate risk to a certain point, but there's always has to be a step that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And when we stood at the bottom of El Cap, when we've landed in Patagonia, when we're pulling away from a harbour or getting on the motorbikes, we have never felt like ready. It's always been like there is still risk involved, but we've done as much as we can to feel confident enough to mitigate that. But it's not like we're standing at the bottom of El Cap being like, yeah, we're all good. This is going to be super easy, and nothing can really go wrong. And if it does, we're all cool.
Enormous crash mat.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been awesome. So there is still the need to step into the unknown. You can only do so much to mitigate it. But the risk is always there. But that's a good thing, because it means you're pushing yourself or your team, hard enough and outside the comfort zone, and that really is where progress lives. So you do also need to be prepared to, suck it in and take that step, that kind of first leap into the unknown, really.
So I'm drawing like so many parallels between Adventure World and Man Behind a Keyboard World to kind of describe it. So in our industry, every single security professional there's an unknown level of risk, right? We don't know what our adversaries are doing to kind of compromise our environment, steal our data, and just give us generally a bad day at work. It's not climbing a mountain. It's not sailing the Atlantic and taking that risk of a capsize and a hurricane. That's once every 65 years. Unlucky.
Thank you.
I mean, well, if you don't have bad luck, you don't have any luck. So let's keep going. What I'm guessing, like with all of those parallels of like, there's risk, there's reward from that risk, there's strength through adversity. Like, what's some advice you can give to our viewers and listeners around, I guess, taking command of their own challenges in their career?
Yeah, I think it's nice to bring something tangible and something that we've taken from our adventures that we then use on a day-to-day. And I'm glad you can draw the parallels because we see it as clear as day. You know, our brain struggles to determine the difference between, you know, the stress response, whether it's on the side of a mountain or from a cyber attack, and it reacts in the same way. And you know, you hear regularly on podcasts or in books about the power of getting outside of your comfort zone to prepare you for those tough situations and to build resilience. And we've been doing a lot of research and studying recently, and there's been a recent study that's come out a couple of years ago, almost exactly around that. And it's, bear with me whilst I dive into a little bit of neuroscience here, but it's fascinated us for these last couple of years. And it's ultimately how you build resilience and willpower and tenacity. And it comes through doing hard things. But there's a part of your brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the AMCC, that is, you know, we can think of it like our motivation muscle. It's responsible for how we act and how we respond to stress and how motivated and driven we are. And like any other muscle in your body, it can grow and shrink depending on the level of activity. But instead of bicep curls to grow your bicep muscles, the reps that you need for your AMCC are doing hard things, doing challenging things that ultimately you don't want to do. And we experience that to a dramatic effect when we're on the side of a mountain or we're rowing for 54 days. And we always would wonder why, you know, when we finish these adventures, why are we so driven? Why do we feel not invincible, but resilient and ready to challenge? Why has our perception of risk changed? And only a couple of years ago, we got that answer, and it lies in the AMCC. And the best thing about it is it's completely trainable every single day to every person, and it translates to whatever you're doing, whatever might cause you stress, whether it's work, whether it's family, and you do that by simple things. As I said, a rep of doing something that you don't want to do doesn't need to be climbing a mountain. On a more daily basis, it might be doing that admin task that you've been putting off for ages, putting the bins out in the pouring rain, you know, getting in that ice bath to, you know, sorry for the cliche, but it's those daily things that do actually positively correlate to growing your AMCC and building resilience. And I think to be able to have that tangible evidence that that works and crosses over is something that we use on a daily basis to help us.
Yeah, and I think we were chatting, you know, in the week leading up to this around how people can take command, especially in your industry. And we've kind of boiled it down to 3 C's essentially. And the first one, which is the crux of it, is having real confidence in yourself. Confidence in your ability as a professional, confidence to get the job done. The second thing is having this curiosity, right? What amazes us about the industry you guys are in is the opponent really is always developing, is always getting smarter, quicker, more cunning, and you not only have to keep up with that, but be one step ahead of it. So curiosity is that crucial ingredient to learn new things that you maybe have a blind spot and see that as actually a benefit. You can feel that, you can learn something new. And then leading on to, I guess the final thing is if you have that curiosity, then you naturally embrace change. And I think, you know, what's so fascinating across the world of tech at the moment is the rate of change is growing exponentially. What you guys are doing now in 5-10 years will be completely different. And, you know, the last 100 years of business across every industry, there is a graveyard of companies that refuse to change. And I think if you have those 3 C's and, you know, each one kind of overlays the next, like that really is how you take command. I don't know if you agree with that in your professional opinion or if there's kind of a nuance to that you've seen.
No, I mean, from my point of view, the one that just slapped me in the face straight away then was curiosity. Aging myself slightly, a couple of decades of being in this space. And I think curiosity has really driven the most successful people I've seen and been fortunate to work with. I love it, and it's personally why I'm in the industry, is the problem set is so varied and different that we have to solve for. And if I didn't have that element of curiosity, it'd be very easy to just, I guess, shy away from that and not dig and not drill into the detail and find out really why things are happening. And yeah, as I say, like every person I've worked with who's been successful, has been passionate, has clearly stood out for having that like almost curious child approach to things, like my son, why daddy, why? It's like that's actually really beneficial in our space. And just by digging and digging and digging, you just find out so much more about your environment that you can take command of and control. You find out a lot more about, I guess, the origin story of why some of these threats exist. And you can really find like creative problem solving moments there, because it might be, we've had a username and password stolen and it's on the dark web. Great, like take it off, like fine, very simple solution. Actually, the real problem is how did it get there in the first place? And you have to have that curiosity to just keep digging around that and find what's going on. So yeah, huge parallels there to us. And I think just fantastic advice for everybody here. I think one of the parallels I draw in, I guess, my world, not necessarily the adventure world, is sometimes every challenge seems insurmountable. And like you stood at the bottom of the very big El Cap staring up. At like what point do you give yourself that assurance that yes, we can do this? Like, yes, that is physically possible for me to be from here to there. Because I think, again, in our space, it's like there's so much to do all of the time. There's an enormous attack surface to take command of. Like, what advice can you give people there?
I think using El Cap as an example is a really good one, right? So when we stood at the bottom of El Capitan for the first time, if you stood at the bottom of El Cap or anyone watching, you'd look up and be like, there's no way I can get to the top of that. But the reality of El Capitan is, it is a series of pitches, a length of rope essentially, and you tick off pitch number 1, pitch number 2, pitch number 3, then you have a rest. And all it is that 3,000 foot wall is broken up into 30 smaller challenges. And all you focus on is, right, how are we going to get to the top of this pitch? And you do that, you complete that, then you regroup and do it again. And really, when you say to someone, we're going to spend 2 months at sea rowing across an ocean, for them, it just seems the breadth of that and the challenge as a whole is unsurmountable. But really, we just took it day by day. We had waypoints plugged into our GPS every 100 miles. And every 100 miles we'd hit, we would celebrate. We'd eat dinner together and, fist bump. It was like, right, cool, on to the next one.
Big celebration, that is.
Yeah, we're pretty depressed.
Open the vacuum seal bag. Cheers.
But that's all it is. A big challenge is just a series of small steps. And if you view things through that scope, it makes everything seem doable. It might take a long time. It might be tough, of course. But that is how you essentially break down something so big.
I completely agree. I think that's one of the biggest skill sets that we've built over the 10 years is the ability to just start and just to take action. I think people are paralysed by the scale of something and the size of a challenge. Climbing El Capitan, rowing an ocean, 1,600 kilometres through Patagonia, whatever it is. It feels too daunting and it gets in the way of people starting. And I think we've built this skill of being able to almost, less thinking, more doing. It's very easy to try and optimize everything around you to have the perfect environment to make stuff happen. But you at the end of the day, you have to take action at some point. And that's all it is. And that's breaking down El Cap into pitches. Going further than that, it's breaking it into single moves and placing one piece of protection at a time or a single oar stroke at a time, which feels like it's not making a dent in the overall goal. But then you look back in 3 days up El Cap or 2 months on the ocean and you've completed it. And I think people get in their own way when it comes to facing daunting challenges or seeing big things, and just starting and trusting the process is the key to making it happen. So yeah, I totally agree.
Also love the fact you called out celebrating the small wins. Like mega important in our space, as you can just get so locked in with, again, the scope of the challenge in front of you and the work that you have to get through on a daily basis, that taking that second to pause, look back, understand just how far you've come,
Yeah.
and then celebrate where you are is, I think, really important.
I think we maybe take that a little bit far. Fist bumps is one thing, but I'll let you into a little secret. That the last thing we did before we pushed off Gran Canaria is we realised that we were out there for Christmas and New Year on the boat, and we thought, we haven't got any beers. So the last thing we did as our family was waiting to wave us off was we ran to the supermarket and we bought 25 cans of lager.
Not sure what we thought,
No.
what kind of thing we were going into.
Hydration is key.
And considering we were told beforehand by every expert that weight on the boat is paramount. You know, they would be weighing out squares of toilet paper to be optimal. And we just took 24 beers and about 15,000 chocolate bars.
And they all split when we capsized. So it was a complete waste of time. I didn't even make it to New Year's party. But yeah, no, I do agree that celebrating small wins, the same, every pitch we completed on LCAP was just if not a celebratory beer, then a fist bump and a nod and just an acknowledgement of the progress that you've made that keeps you going. So I think it's a key thing to do.
Well, with all this, annoyingly and sadly, we kind of run out of time in all of these things, and we're getting to that point. So I've got kind of two more things that I just want to ask you straight away. The first, I think, thinking of curiosity, most people watching this and still with us now are going to be thinking, you've done the Atlantic, you've done Patagonia, you've done paddleboarding, which we didn't even talk about, and then into climbing El Cap. What is the next adventure? I have to know this, and I know, James, you want to kind of take and run with that one.
Yeah, I think that's the blessing and the challenge of being new to completely everything is we have to pick what we want. It has to align with both of us, and we've got to make it work. So in the short term, we're going to be running this really famous route called the Hout route, which is a multi-day 250-kilometre alpine run from Chamonix to Zermatt. Obviously, we've not done anything like it in the past. True Tempest 2 fashion, but it'll push us from a route finding capacity to just pushing ourselves physically, and that's happening in 6 months' time. And then on a grander scale, we're in the process at the moment of figuring out something very big and bold, and the way we work is we surround ourselves with the best people, and that is crucial to the Tempest 2 and it working and being complete novices. We are curious, we embrace curiosity, we surround ourselves with the best, and we have to completely drop our ego. We can't pretend that we know what we're doing. So in the process of figuring out what we need to do, we find the best people and we get their advice. So recently we've gone down one path and it's been closed for us by these experts. We're kind of opening another path that it's still TBC, but we'll just put these three words of the North Pole out there, and we'll go from there.
Can you guess what it is?
Are you going to become Santa?
Yes, that is it.
So yeah, that's kind of where the plan gets at the moment, and then there's a huge amount of work to make it happen, both training-wise, financially, viability, feasibility, if it can possibly happen. Excitingly, we're at the beginning of that process now, but unfortunately it means that it's hard to commit concrete that this is what we're doing and this is when we're going to do it. So it's exciting for us to be where we are.
Well, there's always the opportunity to come and defend against cyber criminals and nation states in
if you'll have
Rapid7 SOC. So you're more than welcome to come and take command with us.
Cybersecurity criminals are just like, yes, here we go.
There we go.
With a weak spot.
Curious about it, right? It's already started. Yeah. Well, thank you. And again, then, for the last takeaway from each of you, what's one thing you can tell our listeners and viewers to take from this today?
From my side, I think it should be really clear by now that neither James or I are superhuman. We're not elite. We have no kind of elite background. We're not ex-military gold medal winners. We're just two ordinary friends that over the last 10 years have managed to develop this mindset. And I think the one thing that we've learned more than any that hopefully people will take away is that doing hard things, not big adventures, but just hard things that make you slightly uncomfortable is wildly beneficial inside the office, outside the office. If you're a leader of a team, pushing your people that extra bit further on a regular basis, the compound interest you get on that over 5-10 years is just unbelievable. So I think embracing that discomfort, pushing yourself, is the one thing that I'd love people to take away.
And for me, I'll keep it very simple, and that is the ethos of the Tempest 2, and that is we want to challenge people to remove the word can't, to objectively look at that phrase, and we think that's the most toxic word in the English language. It's not just a word, it represents an entire mindset that kills curiosity, and as the importance that has, when you objectively are able to remove that, you see opportunities in obstacles, you see challenges as things to overcome rather than things to shy away from, and it opens up a world of opportunity. So that would be my key takeaway.
Amazing. Thank you both so much.
Thanks for having us.
I know we're at the end, and for everyone, this is going to be recorded and shared through our platform, and there's lots of interesting attachments in the attachment section, so please do make use of those. But from everybody watching, all of the listeners, myself, just a huge thank you for coming here, sharing your experiences and taking that risk in doing these things so we can learn. So thanks, Tom, and thanks, James.
Thanks for having us, guys. Thank you.
Cheers.